Hello and welcome. You're watching India Sense. I'm Gaurie Dwivedi. Let's get you the big stories that we are tracking this evening. First up, massive protests across Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. What started with a people's revolution against 38 unfulfilled demands has now snowballed into a broader agitation against the repression and excesses committed by the Pakistani army. Hypocrisy thy name. Donald Trump all set to give thousands of dollars worth as much as $38 billion to American farmers, but protests when India tries to protect its farmers. From Nepal to Morocco, Gen Z protests are raging on. We decode right here for you what is behind the violent youth uprising and are there any lessons for India?
And at least 4 to 5 fighter aircraft, most likely F-16, because that base happened to be F-16, which would have been under maintenance that time. Along with that, one SAM system, which has been destroyed.
IAF chief tells the world and Pakistan just how much destruction did India cause during Operation Sindoor. IAF chief says the Operation Sindoor was a demonstration of India's air power. And this is the India Sense story right here for you viewers. Perplexity AI CEO becomes India's youngest billionaire. Joins the billionaire club. The Chennai boy Arvind breaks the India billionaire record. Viewers, our big story this week. What's happening in Pakistan? Last month, the Pakistani military bombed its own people in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, killing 30 civilians, which included women and children. Now there are massive protests in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, and people have been killed as well when they were revolting against the repression of the Pakistani army. Now, in fact, a big believer in internationalizing conflicts, the generals of the Pakistani army are now dreading what's likely to happen next. The PoK diaspora community is likely to hold protests across the US, Europe and other parts of the world, documenting the kind of excesses that the Pakistani army has been committing. The protests this week in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir weren't the first in the region. They have been seeing repeated unrest due to continued problems that have been there because of neglect and because of systemic corruption. In fact, in 2023, Pakistan increased the rates of electricity, withdrew subsidies on wheat, and people were up in arms. They were on the streets. But that was also brutally crushed by force by the Pakistani military. Prices have been soaring, people don't have jobs, there is no development, and there is massive corruption. Viewers, there's a reason why a large part of the boat casualty victims due to overcrowding during attempted and failed migrations actually are residents of Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, because they have absolutely nothing else to look forward to. Prices of essentials are now out of reach, and demography has been completely altered to serve the interests of the Punjabi generals of the Pakistani army. Now, for India, this has massive ramifications. First and foremost, it means we need to keep a very tight vigil on what is happening. We need to be prepared for these protests to possibly gain momentum as well and probably become much bigger. Listen in to what India's spokesperson had to say about these protests, and then we come back and tell you why this is a pattern and not an isolated instance.
We have seen reports on protests in several areas of Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, including brutalities by Pakistani forces on innocent civilians. We believe that it is a natural consequence of Pakistan's oppressive approach and systemic plundering of resources from these territories, which remain under its forcible and illegal occupation. Pakistan must be held accountable for its horrific human rights violations.
There is now a clear pattern. There is Balochistan, there is Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and there is now Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. What next is the question. Well, Asim Munir will do well to stop whining and dining with Donald Trump and focus more on fixing his country. And for starters, He needs to stop bombing his own people and then get in some fixes. Let's get you an important voice to talk more on how this is likely to pan out as far as India is concerned. What will be the ramifications and how should India be preparing for this? Ambassador Rajiv Dogra, who's former Consul General to Karachi, is joining me on the broadcast. Let me start by asking you, Ambassador Dogra, in terms of the possibility of the Pakistani military being able to control these protests, because this is not an isolated instance. This has not been triggered by something immediate. This is nothing but a pent-up frustration of people seeing nothing, absolutely nothing that's working out for them, and the military adding to their woes.
Well, Pakistan has a lot of security forces deployed in the area, and they are not hesitating to shoot directly at people. That's why so many have been killed. So I don't rule out that the rule of the rod will prevail. But the fact is that the delegation that Pakistan had sent to PoK has failed in its mission. The latest reports are that the residents there, or the protesters and their leaders, are not convinced that the Pakistani side is sincere. Basically, to answer the bigger question, this is not a one-off. This protest has been going on time and again for the last 2 years.
Yes.
And people have been killed in 2 other protests, similar protests, but this is the biggest of all. And this is really a grassroots protest because the reasons are many. And reasons are really a combination of apathy by the central government of Pakistan, which has got this control over PoK, the discrimination by the Punjabi settlers there, and the loot by both the officers of the Punjabi Pakistan and also by the Punjabi settlers there, who really are astonishing in number. The total population of PoK, not including Gilgit and Baltistan, is about 4 million plus, out of which the Punjabis account for over 2 million people. That means the demography of PoK has been changed, and yet there are huge protests.
What you are saying is 50% of Pakistan-occupied Kashmir now accounts for Punjabis. Now, this is not an isolated instance. There are protests happening across Pakistan. You take Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, you take Balochistan, now you take Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Where is this headed?
Well, to all practical purposes, they are not connected. The protests are not only in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, but also in Balochistan. And they are much more intense and long-term in their sort of struggle against Pakistan. PoK is much smaller in terms of population in comparison to the other two, and it is at a much weaker wicket. Just to give you one statistic, out of 4 million plus population, there are only 5,000 income taxpayers. And I don't have the exact data, but I'm sure those 5,000 will also be the Punjabi settlers. As for the Kashmiris, if you look at the clothes of the protesters, it is pitiable because they obviously seem to be in extreme poverty. And it is what they see from Jammu and Kashmir and people, lifestyle of people there, the extremely wealthy lifestyle in comparison, that must be adding to their resentment. And that must be the reason why they would much rather merge with India, as they should, than live under the gunfire of Pakistani army.
All right, I'm going to leave it there, Ambassador Dogra. Thanks much for speaking to me. At the end of the day, India is keeping a very close watch on how things are unraveling, and rather quickly, for Asim Munir in Pakistan. First wide angle story on the show. Well, it will be 2 years since the Gaza war has been raging, viewers, triggered by Hamas's hideous attack on Israel in 2023, 7th of October. And it seems Trump has a solution. Or well, maybe not, who knows. But dubbing it as one of the greatest days ever in civilization, Donald Trump laid out a comprehensive 20-point proposal to end the war in Gaza. It sounded less like a diplomatic framework, more like the wish list of Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. And soon there were reports circling about more than one formula being shown to more than one party. And suddenly you realize things are not looking the way they were. This report tells you why Gaza peace plan may or may not actually fructify. And what falls apart is not just the peace framework, but also Donald Trump's Nobel ambitions. Take a look.
A deal that promises peace in Gaza, a blueprint for stability in the Middle East. Sounds too good to be true? That's what US President Donald Trump promised this week with his 20-point framework, a proposal embraced by Israel and endorsed by key Arab nations, including Qatar and the UAE. Beneath the grand announcement, the deal is fragile. Hamas has yet to approve it, required to disarm and release all 48 hostages, of which only 20 are still alive, and relinquish any role in Gaza's future. Israel, meanwhile, won last-minute changes on troop withdrawals and Hamas disarmament, made without the knowledge of the Arab nations that endorsed the plan. Yet Washington is pushing Israel to make certain compromises. The US proposed deal allows for a credible pathway to Palestinian self-determination and statehood.
Hamas uses civilians.
An idea Netanyahu firmly rejected in his defiant address to the UN General Assembly last week.
Giving the Palestinians a state 1 mile from Jerusalem after October 7th is like giving Al-Qaeda a state 1 mile from New York City after September 11th. This is sheer madness. It's insane, and we won't do it.
The plan also fails to mention the West Bank, a clear flashpoint between the two sides as clashes worsen. From handing over of terror-free zones to deployment of the international stabilization forces, execution of the deal remains unclear, making it less viable. For President Trump, this is more than peace. His 20-point plan puts him alongside former UK PM Tony Blair at the helm of Gaza's transitional government overseeing reconstruction. What he calls a peace framework looks increasingly like a bid to take control of Gaza.
Viewers, Hamas is yet to respond to the US proposal, with reports suggesting a top Hamas military leader demands key revisions and has already rejected the plan. With less than a day to go for the ultimatum to Hamas, the big question remains, can this proposal stop the war? And if not, what new horrors will the people in Gaza face? Trump made it clear, if Hamas does not accept the deal, they will pay in hell, a threat made in the past, allowing Israel to do whatever it takes to finish the war. Turning attention now to the other wide-angle story on the show. Donald Trump is a man of contradictions, but he's also a man of deep hypocrisy. He preaches something to someone and does the complete opposite when it comes to himself. And no, I'm not even talking about the fact that India is penalized for buying Russian oil when the biggest purchaser is China and has been given yet another extension in tariff deadline by Donald Trump. I am talking about Trump administration's repeated pampering of the agriculture sector. They are now going to get doleouts worth $35 billion, maybe up to $50 billion from two funds, from USDA's Commodity Corporation Fund and possibly even from the funds that have been collected by way of higher tariffs. Now, this could be $1,000 to $2,000 per person, even more, depending on how much do American farmers actually need. Now, let's understand this. American farmers make up 2% of the workforce. They get subsidies to the tune of billions of dollars. Compare that to India. They make up about 45% of the workforce. Revenues are stuck at 17% of the GDP, But there are rural women who are at the forefront of agriculture, particularly dairy farming, which is why this is so important. Now, when India says we need to protect our farmers in terms of keeping it out of a trade deal, suddenly Trump administration decides to penalize New Delhi for it. One must ask, farm subsidies in USA came in 1933. Yes, viewers, 1933. It has been continuing for over 9 decades later. One can ask how many times has the American economy grown since then? But why are they still there? Well, for the exact same reason that India protects its own farm sector. The social cost of uprooting and upheaval is much larger than what is made up in terms of removing these farm subsidies. And that is why calling out Trump's hypocrisy is so important. Listen in to what Donald Trump had to say about his favorite word in the dictionary, tariffs.
I love tariffs. Most beautiful word. But I'm not allowed to say that anymore. I said tariff is my favorite word. I love the word tariff. You know, we're becoming rich as hell. My favorite word in the English dictionary is the word tariff. And people thought that was strange. And the fake news came over and they really hit me hard on it. They said, what about love? What about religion? What about God? What about wife, family? I got killed when I said tariff is my favorite word.
That is Hypocrisy 101, viewers, but there is, well, more drama in Trumpland. As the US president is back on the attack, this time not against foreign enemies, but against America's own generals. This week saw Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth take on his own, mocking top military leaders, calling them fat and woke, as if physical appearance or diversity training is a greater threat than global instability. Even calling for a purge of Pentagon leadership, as if the armed forces were a reality TV show, not the spine of American defense. Listen in to what the Defense Secretary had to say, lecturing, preaching, and talking down to military veterans.
If the Secretary of War can do regular, hard PT, so can every member of our joint force. Frankly, it's tiring to look out at combat formations, or really any formation, and see fat troops. Likewise, it's completely unacceptable to see fat generals and admirals in the halls of the Pentagon and leading commands around the country and the world. It's a bad look. It is bad, and it's not who we are.
Viewers, this is not about national security. Let's be very clear about it. It's not even about military readiness. It's about optics, weaponizing the image of the military to score political points. But let's ask the real question here. What exactly is the goal here? Replacing seasoned military commanders with those who passed Trump's loyalty test, substituting strategic expertise with political obedience. Because history shows us in vivid, bloody detail what happens when militaries become tools of one man's ego. Mocking generals for their weight or their values doesn't make the US safer. It just makes the message clearer that for Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth, loyalty is above everything. Even respect for the nation and service comes a distant second. Well, viewers, the youth are rising. Gen Z, the first generation to have grown up in the internet age, has become the face of the anti-government protests across countries. In the global south, Nepal, Morocco, Madagascar, all of them. What's their superpower? Well, the digital world. Gen Z has managed to mobilize large movements using hashtags, AI-enhanced images, fast-paced videos, along with a healthy dose of sarcasm. This report decodes why is it that the Gen Z are rising and what exactly is their ranks.
Young, tired, restless. Across continents, the youth or the Gen Z are rebelling. A new generation of protesters has burst into view, demanding justice, accountability, and a future worth staying for. In Nepal, frustration over corruption, nepotism, and broken promises boiled over. Streets filled with furious young protesters. Buildings torched, parliament stormed, a government toppled. The message? They will no longer tolerate corrupt leaders robbing them of their future. thousands more poured into the streets in Morocco under the banner Gen Z 212. As anger grew over the government's choice to pump billions into building football stadiums for the 2030 FIFA World Cup, while the public suffers from the crumbling healthcare system. The result? Police stations burned down as police clashed with protesters, killing 2. In Madagascar, shortages lit the fuse. No water, no power, collapsing services. Youth, fed up with broken promises, rose in wave after wave, calling for system-wide change. While President Andry Rajoelina was forced to dissolve his government, he refuses to resign as protests rage on, which have killed 22 so far and left more than 100 injured. These movements share a new playbook. They are leaderless, digital, decentralized. They organize via Discord, TikTok, Instagram, memes, symbols, viral videos. They reject old politics even as they fight for real reform. But the road ahead is rough. Police crackdowns, clashes, arrests, lives lost. Public anger remains, but state power fights back hard. The challenge? Turning rebellion into reform, transforming anger into policy. Across Asia, Africa, Latin America, Gen Z is no longer waiting on the sidelines, but taking charge. Governments may try to silence them, but a generation that has nothing to lose and everything to fight for cannot be suppressed. And the storm they've unleashed is only beginning.
Viewers, governments across the globe are concerned, for a single Gen Z uprising has the power to topple decades-long rules. So what must New Delhi take away from these mass uprisings in its neighborhood? New Delhi has the largest youth population in the world, with about 65% of the people under the age of 35. Their opinions matter, and it's a must to engage than silence them. Include younger leaders in policy making, generate quality employment, ensure any flashpoints in the country are addressed. While India's diverse democracy is less at risk of such mass uprisings, it is crucial India learns from its neighbors. Well, viewers, that's all the time we have in this edition of India Ascends. Thanks so much for watching.